10,000 North Korean soldiers are currently standing on European soil. On April 2, 2026, European intelligence agencies released irrefutable satellite imagery and intercepted communications proving that a massive contingent of North Korean military personnel has been deployed across Russia and the occupied territories of Ukraine. This is no longer a proxy conflict fought with imported artillery shells. A heavily sanctioned, nuclear-armed Asian dictatorship has just directly entered a European war. Officially, Moscow designates these 10,000 men as construction workers and engineering personnel. The reality, confirmed by signals intelligence and ground-level reconnaissance, is that these are highly specialized operators, ballistic missile technicians, and elite special forces units directly subordinate to Pyongyang. For the first time in modern history, American-made weapons deployed in Europe are actively killing North Korean soldiers, effectively globalizing a conflict that Western capitals have desperately tried to contain. You are watching the collapse of a geopolitical firewall, and the implications for global security, the global economy, and the American taxpayer are immediate and severe. To understand the sheer scale of this escalation, we have to trace the logistical and political pipeline that led to the events of April 2nd. The groundwork for this unprecedented deployment did not happen overnight. It began in late 2023 when Pyongyang initiated the transfer of over 3,152mm artillery shells to the Russian Federation, utilizing the port of Rajin and the Trans-Siberian Railway to bridge the 9,388-kilometer distance between North Korean munitions factories and the European front line. But hardware has a shelf life, and Russian domestic production of complex missile systems like the Iskander-M could not meet the demands of high-intensity conflict. By January 2026, intelligence indicated a critical shift. Pyongyang stopped merely sending crates of ammunition. They began sending the exact weapon systems that require extensive, highly trained crews to operate. The deployment of personnel officially began in the second week of March 2026, moving under the cover of darkness and utilizing severe electronic warfare jamming to mask the transportation of North Korean troops from staging areas in Vladivostok all the way to command nodes situated just 120 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Western intelligence agencies had warned of this exact scenario for 18 months, but those warnings were systematically dismissed by policymakers who believed Kim Jong-Un would never risk direct involvement outside the Korean peninsula. That assumption died on April 2nd. At the center of this 10,000-man deployment is the operation and maintenance of the KN-23. Officially designated as the Hwasong-11GA solid-fueled tactical ballistic missile. This is not obsolete Cold War-era equipment. The KN-23 is a highly capable system with a confirmed operational range of 380 to 690 kilometers, carrying a 500-kilogram payload. More importantly, it possesses a quasi-ballistic trajectory, meaning it can perform pull-up maneuvers in its terminal phase, specifically designed to evade American-made MIM-104 Patriot air defense systems. The North Korean operators currently embedded with Russian forces are directly programming the flight paths of these missiles, targeting critical energy infrastructure and military logistics hubs. On the ground, this means the Russian military has effectively outsourced a significant portion of its deep strike capabilities to a foreign military force. This creates an immediate technological battlefield. The KN-23 requires highly specialized telemetry tracking, launch sequencing, and maintenance. Skills that cannot be taught to Russian conscripts in a matter of weeks. By embedding 10,000 technicians and special operations security elements to guard these launch sites, Pyongyang ensures their most advanced conventional weapons perform at maximum capacity. The geopolitical ramifications of this move are instantly destabilizing existing alliances. By allowing North Korean military personnel to operate from its sovereign territory, Russia has fundamentally violated multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions that it previously helped draft. In response, NATO and the G7 have convened emergency sessions, but the diplomatic toolkit is virtually empty. You cannot sanction a country that is already the most sanctioned entity on the planet. Behind the scenes, diplomatic channels are in absolute chaos. South Korea, recognizing that its primary adversary is now gaining invaluable modern combat experience, is fundamentally reassessing its own arms export policies, signaling a potential direct supply of advanced lethal aid to Ukraine. This creates a chain reaction. If Seoul steps in, Beijing, which shares a 1,520-kilometer border with North Korea, faces an unpredictable proxy war on its doorstep that it does not control. Economically, the transaction between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-Un represents a massive shadow economy that directly bypasses the global financial system. North Korea is not sending 10,000 elite troops for free. Intelligence estimates indicate that Russia is compensating Pyongyang with an immediate transfer of 500,000 barrels of refined petroleum, critical food shipments, and, most alarmingly, advanced aerospace and nuclear submarine technologies. This barter system completely nullifies Western economic leverage. When a nation is paid in hard commodities and military technology rather than dollars or euros, traditional economic sanctions become completely obsolete. Market reactions to the April 2nd intelligence drop were swift, with European defense contractor stocks surging by 14% in a single trading day, while global energy markets priced in an additional risk premium, fearing that North Korea's emboldened stance could lead to disruptions in other theaters, specifically the Indo-Pacific supply chains that handle over 40% of global trade. Looking forward, we must objectively evaluate where this unprecedented deployment leads. There are three distinct scenarios based on current military posture and geopolitical data. The best-case scenario holds a probability of roughly 15%. In this outcome, Western intelligence provides exact coordinates of the North Korean operating bases within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Utilizing long-range precision fires like the MGM-140 ATAC-MES, Allied-backed forces conduct devastating, targeted strikes against these specific launch sites and housing facilities. A high casualty rate among the North Korean elite contingent causes immediate domestic political friction in Pyongyang. Realizing the vulnerability of his forces and the lack of Russian air defense protection, Kim Jong-un quietly withdraws the surviving personnel within 90 days. In this scenario, the United States and NATO successfully demonstrate that European airspace is a death trap for foreign proxies, deterring any future deployments and severely humiliating both Moscow and Pyongyang. The worst-case scenario carries a deeply concerning 25% probability. Rather than withdrawing under pressure, Kim Jong-un uses the initial deployment of 10,000 technical specialists as a vanguard for a much larger conventional force. Within the next 6 months, Pyongyang commits a full expeditionary force of 100,000 infantrymen. This massive influx of manpower fundamentally alters the balance of power on the European continent. Russian forces, relieved of localized frontline duties, concentrate exclusively on strategic breakthroughs. The sudden arrival of 100,000 fresh troops collapses localized defensive lines, forcing NATO to invoke emergency reinforcement protocols across its eastern flank. For the United States, this triggers an immediate, mandatory redeployment of assets from the Indo-Pacific to Europe, leaving Taiwan and the South China Sea critically exposed, effectively creating the two-front global crisis the Pentagon has feared for decades. The most likely scenario, standing at a 60% probability, is a grim normalization of this new reality. The initial 10,000 troops are not withdrawn, nor are they massively expanded into a massive infantry horde. Instead, a permanent rotating pipeline of North Korean specialists and weaponry becomes the new baseline. Every 6 months, fresh technicians arrive to replace the old ones. Pyongyang establishes a permanent military footprint in western Russia, treating the conflict as a perpetual live-fire testing laboratory. This drags the war on for another 3 to 5 years, locking the United States and Europe into an endless cycle of funding and supplying air defense systems. The sheer financial attrition of shooting down $3 million KN-23 missiles with $4 million Patriot interceptors slowly drains Western defense budgets, while North Korea continuously refines its ballistic missile technology based on real-world telemetry data. For the American public, the impact of this development is not an abstract foreign policy issue. It is a direct security and economic reality. The United States has committed over $175 billion to the defense of Europe since 2022, Every single one of those tax dollars is now actively engaged in countering not just the Russian military, but the armed forces of North Korea. The security implications are profound. Because American weapons, operated by Allied forces, are now directly targeting and eliminating North Korean personnel, the United States is arguably in a low-intensity proxy war with a nuclear-armed state in the Pacific. If North Korean operators are killed by an American-supplied HIMARS strike, Pyongyang's doctrine dictates a necessary escalation, which could manifest not in Europe but through cyber attacks on American critical infrastructure or aggressive maneuvers against the 28,500 American troops currently stationed in South Korea. Economically, the failure of the sanctions regime, highlighted by this deployment, hits the American wallet. As global instability rises, the defense industrial base must dramatically scale up production to meet a threat matrix that now includes two hostile nuclear-armed nations actively cooperating on a single battlefield. This requires massive federal defense spending, which directly contributes to sustained inflationary pressure. Furthermore, as the risk of a broader conflict rises, global shipping insurance premiums increase, energy markets become highly volatile, and the cost of goods from electronics to gasoline experiences upward pressure. Americans must understand that when the global security architecture fractures in Eastern Europe, the economic shockwaves are felt at the local grocery store and the gas pump within weeks. The federal government is already quietly adjusting its strategic reserves and defense supply chains, preparing for a scenario where European defense requires permanent, elevated funding that will dominate congressional budget battles for the next decade. What the mainstream media is largely missing in their coverage of the April 2nd intelligence drop is the fundamental psychology and strategic brilliance of Kim Jong-un's maneuver. The media often portrays the North Korean leadership as erratic, cartoonish, or driven by blind ideological hatred of the West. Nothing could be further from the truth. Kim Jong-un is acting with extreme, cold-blooded pragmatism. He has absolutely no ideological hatred for Ukraine, nor does he harbor deep historical grievances against Eastern Europe. He is simply utilizing this conflict as a highly lucrative commercial venture and an invaluable military laboratory. By deploying these 10,000 soldiers, Kim is exposing his military to modern, 21st-century network-centric warfare. North Korean generals have not fought a large-scale war since 1953. Their military doctrine is entirely theoretical. By sending their operators to face Western electronic warfare, advanced satellite reconnaissance, and modern air defense networks, Kim is gathering data that is impossible to replicate in a training environment. They are testing exactly how long it takes an American Patriot radar to paint a KN-23. They are measuring the exact effectiveness of NATO jamming equipment against their communication nodes. This is an intelligence goldmine. Furthermore, the media focuses on what Russia gains, but misses what Pyongyang takes home. The nuclear submarine and satellite technology Moscow is trading for these soldiers will rapidly accelerate North Korea's ability to threaten the United States homeland. The media treats this as a story about the European war. The reality is that it is a story about the Pacific War of the future, being beta tested on European soil today. The deployment of 10,000 North Korean military personnel to the European theater, exposed on April 2, 2026, permanently erases the geographic boundaries of modern conflict. The integration of Pyongyang's ballistic missile operators into the Russian military apparatus demonstrates that the alliance between sanctioned, autocratic states has moved from economic convenience to full operational integration. In the short term, we will see an immediate intensification of long-range missile strikes across Eastern Europe, heavily utilizing the KN-23 systems manned by these new deployments. The key indicator to watch over the next 45 days is whether Allied forces capture a North Korean operator alive, creating an unprecedented diplomatic hostage crisis, and how South Korea responds to its adversary gaining real-world combat experience against Western weapon systems. The era of localized proxy wars is officially dead, replaced by a highly integrated, globalized battlefield where decisions made in Pyongyang are now paid for with American resources and European lives.